the leaders of the protest movement in Sudan say they are cutting off contact with the military in the wake of this morning's violence in Khartoum, in which at least 12 demonstrators are reported to have died. Security forces opened fire on protesters this morning, but the military authorities have denied they were trying to disperse the demonstrators outside the military headquarters. The breakup of the sit-in follows the collapse of talks between the Transitional Military Council and the opposition forces for the Declaration of Freedom and Change on the establishment of an interim government.
It's the worst violence since the overthrow of President Omar al-Bashir in April. After a night of violence, protesters began erecting barricades using bricks and flaming tires in preparation to block entry to the sit-in in central Khartoum. Security forces opened fire on protesters on Monday morning, but the military authorities denied trying to disperse the demonstrators outside the military headquarters. Talks between protesters and Sudan's military rulers over who should govern during the transitional period are in deadlock. The Transitional Military Council, which assumed power in April, has offered to let protesters form a government to run the country, but insists on maintaining overall authority during an interim period. The demonstrators, however, disagree, demanding that a civilian government take over as soon as possible.
Let's get some perspective now on the issue in Sudan. The Director General of the Bolitak Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Professor Bola Akintayowa, joins us now on the program. Professor, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
So it is rather disturbing, the news emanating from Sudan after all this time. Apart from the usual condemnation, how should the international community, especially the AU, the UN, the EU, and the US, and probably Nigeria, react to this violence?
I think there's only one approach left for the international community, and that is the need to apply the principle of IR2P, that is international responsibility to protect. Why? 3 reasons. Reason 1 is that, according to reports, the military blocked the exits, all right, way out from where people are seated, peacefully demonstrating. Now they blocked the exit and they were shooting live ammunition. That necessarily makes this an intention, all right, to engage in genocidal crimes, meaning that the military actually, as they have been reported to have done, they need to be charged, taken to the International Criminal Court, and be charged for crimes against humanity. First point. The second point is to seek to empower the opposition elements in such a way that they are economically vibrant, empowered enough to be able to resist military dictatorship that is being put in place. Most significantly, economic sanctions must be taken against the military. The reason in this case is that, according to the African Union, under no circumstance will any military dictatorship be allowed. You cannot take over power by use of force. So it is there. Now, if we do not apply the principle of international responsibility to protect, then there is the need to apply another principle, and that is the principle of subsidiarity, according to which you allow the regional powers, the Central African region, the East African region, to mediate in the crisis. It is not by bringing the Arab countries from Asia to come and intervene. No, it has been approved and agreed upon that African problems must be given African solutions.
I quite agree with you, with the African problems being given the African solution. But you see the AU dragging its feet on Sudan, not condemning, well, apart from condemning, it's taken them a long time, to intervene in this crisis. And it really doesn't seem like they're doing much. But you talk about the military being charged with crimes against humanity and so on. Who's going to take the responsibility of taking this military to court or making them face, the consequences for their action, considering that they are in charge of Sudan as we speak?
That is why I moved from the principle of international responsibility to protect to the principle of subsidiarity. They constitute two sides of the same coin. You see, the issue is that when a government is unable to protect the citizens, all right, the principle is supposed to be applied automatically. But we are now told, for instance, reports, the military in power is not only unable to protect, it is the attacker, it's not the aggressor. Press freedom, we are told, they locked up the office of Al Jazeera, press freedom, and people were being killed as a result. This is unacceptable. And in this case, it is the African Union and the regional organizations that have to, by force of necessity, refer the matter to the ICC. The United Nations must act.
United Nations, and then what about Nigeria, which is a leader in Africa? Shouldn't we have a say on what's going on in Sudan? We're also a leader in the AU. We're the head of the Peace and Security Council. What should we do in this situation?
Nigeria can intervene. No, let me say interfere, first of all, not intervene. For whichever is the case, Nigeria can do so bilaterally. If it is not going to be bilateral, it can only be multilateral, and that can only be within the framework of the African Union Peace and Security Framework. You see, the principle of subsidiarity is simple. It simply says that when there is a crisis, before you allow it to degenerate into the level of a conflict, the regional organization there should be seized with the crisis and address it. Now, Sudan does not fall within the West African region, where Nigeria can provide such leadership. But since we have 4 million Sudanese of Nigerian origin, then Nigeria has some vested interest to be involved. And in this case, what can happen would be for Nigeria to allow or to empower, to engage in the discussions of the Central African region or the East African region.
Yeah, Professor, we've seen the end result of a crisis such as this. I mean, Sudan had been in crisis for a really long time. The spillover were refugees found in different refugee camps in Kenya and so on, and people don't want a repeat of that. What more effects will this likely have on the region, especially for neighboring South Sudan, which already has its own political and social crisis?
The effects are multidimensional in scope. The first is that when you have a crisis, a conflict, there is no way you can avoid IDP case, that is internally displaced people. So South Sudan must prepare to play host to the internally displaced people. Secondly, the effect will not only come from Sudan itself. It will come from as far away as Syria. The Syrian conflict is such that those combatants there have been displaced. And they are looking desperately for places to go to. So we are going to have mercenaries, IC soldiers coming not only into Sudan, but to South Sudan. More significantly, when there's a conflict, opportunity is always given to weapons manufacturers to test new weapons. So Sudan is going to play host to the testing of new ground. More significantly, South Sudan will be compelled to strengthen its national defense and security.
Right.
And to give opportunity to the international community to provide aid to South Sudan. Opportunities like this, provide a proxy.
Yeah.
Proxy war.
Yeah.
So care must be taken in such a way that the aggravation does not lead to another intra-African regional war.
Yeah, as we have seen, of course, with Nigeria, you know, the war in Syria, the Boko Haram insurgency is also a fallout, you know, of the war in Syria. Professor, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
It's a pleasure having me. Thank you.